Right, good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to this council meeting, and we'll just welcome along councillors and staff, any members of the public who are watching the live stream, and members of the media. So we'll get on to things with first of all, call for apologies. We have two that I'm aware of, Councillor Percival and Councillor Ryan. Are there any other apologies? Okay, move Councillor Holding that we accept those. Secondly, Councillor Blackler. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving to declaration of interest. Do we have any declarations? None. No members of public forum today. So confirmation of the minutes, item 4.1 for the meeting held on the 14th of February. Do we have someone move? Councillor Thompson and then Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, look, I have a couple of very small corrections. Well, one very small and one slightly larger correction. On page 7, second paragraph, second line, but had spoken to Dr. Philippa Agnew. So one of the heads needs to be expunged from the record. On the next page 8, third paragraph under 5.1, discussion also supported the submission's recommendation that waiting under the new legislation that were to give effect to the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitaki and but only have regard to them on the basis of equality. It needs amplification. The word "and" needs to be deleted, but only have regard to them in relation to community submissions, full stop. Capital O, on the basis of equality, this needed to be altered to be the same.
Yeah.
So I'm just suggesting that those two changes be made.
That makes sense. Thank you. Any other comments? I should put those. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? That is carried. Okay. Moving now to item 5.1, my report. So as you've probably noted, I did spend a lot of time talking about the recent events in the North Island, some of the impacts and challenges that we've had, or that they've had up there, but also looking at some of the repercussions and some of the thinking that we need to make sure that we're doing as we try to learn and improve what we have as far as civil defence and emergency managements here in the South Island, in particular for us, Otago. So yeah, gone into a bit of detail on that. Also talk a little bit about the Adopt a District program that we're part of with us, Waipā District and Clutha District, all supporting the Far North District. So basically just the opportunity to personalise things a little bit more, so that if people are donating money or other items and so on, that there's a more of a focus on where that's going. So just on that one, I'm picking up as maximum amount as I can possibly get into a carry-on to a check-in bag of clothing from Moke. They're donating around 250 items. I can get them to Wellington with me when I head there for rural and provincial this week, and me and Malcolm Tapania from Far North is going to be at rural and provincial, and I can hand them over to him. So short circuit the challenges of getting stuff across the strait. But yeah, that's one of the ways of getting some assistance up there, and make sure that we're helping out those people. Just of note, we had a webinar the other day, or session on Zoom with quite a few mayors and so on there, and there were several mayors giving their views of how they've dealt with the devastation from this event, and also had Mayor Tim King talk about some of the events that Tasman District suffered in the past, and yeah, just some of the learnings and so on that they've had. Mayor Tapania was on there, and he's one of the challenges they have in the Far North is that they don't have too many red stickered houses. I think there's only one that's actually red stickered in their district, but it's only consented houses that get checked. And so there's a lot of, because of that area, there's a lot of people who are, have decent amounts of land, but not money, particularly Māori who don't have full title to land. It's a shared title situation. There's a lot of illegal building that's gone on there, so to speak. And so, when you see some of those places that have been devastated, pretty much be assured that they're not insured, and they're not coming up in the statistics, but they are people's homes and they have lost them. So, it's a pretty tough situation because just the deprivation and index on big parts of their district is pretty high. So something to be very mindful of is we're focusing our donations and so on towards the far north. Talked a little bit about the forestry slash. So there's been a wee bit of news since I wrote this, just on the focus that the government's having with their inquiry into forestry slash. There's no doubt that there's quite a number of bridges that have gone that would still be there if it wasn't for this particular problem. And good to see on the news last night that one of the forestry companies put their hand up and said, yeah, this is something we've got to sort out. And so that's good. And some of the cost of replacing bridges alone is going to be very substantial, and the impact on communities that have been cut off because those bridges are gone or are forced to go a very long way out of their normal route to get from A to B is it's a significant cost in time and money to be able to do that. Other than that, Alps Ocean turned 10. We had a good celebration at the Lake Oho Lodge with that one, and talked a wee bit about the tours that you've all been on to look around the district. We're still working on the itinerary for the Oamaru Corridor ward tour, so looking forward to getting that one sorted out and getting it under our belt as well. So that's probably more than enough from me. Happy to take any questions or comments as people wish. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, no, thank you for this, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report. And I think I share your concerns about the implications of Cyclone Gabrielle and our need to be prepared. I've got two questions. On page 16, you talk about the slash and the issue of possibility of exacerbating paying and so forth. I'm just wondering, where is local government NZ on this? I haven't heard anything from them on this matter. They're speaking today, or have spoken today in radio interviews, about the need for more local support, local autonomy, local funding in the context of the FFLG, Future for Local Government report. But so question one is, where are they at? Where are they, and can we nudge them into a more vigorous position on that matter? I believe we should. Second question I have is just on page 18. You talk about the need to be prepared, and I think we should, rather, in addition to talking about it, we need a preparation, inventory and plan. And at the top of in my view, and at the top of the page, you talk about investing in satellite phones and emergency kits and the like. I'm just wondering, we still have a disaster fund, do we not? And I have a feeling that last time, although we're not topping it up at the moment, it did have about $2 million in it. Would it be legitimate to use any or some of that to actually do some preparatory work so that we are better placed in the event of a catastrophe like Gabrielle here?
Okay, so on the first one, I haven't noticed anything from LGNZ directly, but whether they are focused on some of the bigger issues at the moment, because this stuff has been happening anyway, or not, we can find out at rural and provincial. And we do have that funding in the disaster fund, which is, it was put together to help recover from situations, but I think being prepared is, more important in many ways than not. So it probably is a decision for us, but I'll hand over to Mr. Palmley and he can make comments on that one, was it?
Yeah, specifically on that one. I mean, I think first of all, we need to say we have got plans in place, and I think this is about learning the lessons and thinking about the adequacy of those plans. And I think we were doing a bit of a review anyway in terms of our preparedness for AF8, and I think we can add to that extreme weather events and the impact on our communities, and how do we ensure that our communities have a larger degree of resilience and building that up. And I think that's the outcome that we want. In terms of that disaster fund, I'd say, a disaster fund is for disasters. We're not in a disaster, and I'm not sure that that would be the best use of that. But I think clearly, if we're going to be more prepared, and we need to go through that process of determining exactly what we need and what it's going to cost, then we probably need to add something to our annual plan process to actually provide for a greater level of preparedness and save, the disaster fund monies for if we have a disaster, rather than finding ourselves short of funds, if that were to occur. And, there's a high likelihood that we'll face something at some point in the near future.
Yeah, probably should have said about the planning that is there, which has been significant at across Otago and across the South Island, really, when we're talking about the Alpine Fault particular issue, which is probably the most likely the biggest event that we're going to face. So that's, it's about getting the more of the detail sorted, I think, and that's where preparing communities that could be isolated, making sure that they've got a power source and that they've got a communication source is really important. So it's about in our case, well, the way it's set up, we've got the CEG, the KEG group, which is the CEs belong to, and so this work that they can be doing with Otago Emergency Management to look at some of those things. And then we've got the CDM group, which is the joint committee of the mayors.
So the KEG group should roll out the barrel.
Yes, the KEG group could roll out the barrel. Councillor Hopkins, thank you. Very good. And it's looking at what's done on a regional level, and then what are the bits we want to make sure that our community is particularly resilient and that we can assist in. So, Councillor Hale.
Thank you for your report and just acknowledging all those families and those communities that are suffering from the disasters up north. I'm fully supportive of us looking into our level of preparedness. And I guess just from a more community, local grassroots based, I'm aware that you and Graham is facilitating a workshop at the end of March to help support business continuity planning for some agencies, but it'd really be good to consider how we can help support education and building capability workshops for actual families, just to support what needs to be happened on the ground. I've been in contact with a lot of the Pacific communities up north, and the church leaders and the Pacific groups are the ones that are providing their response. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there are other avenues, like for us to kind of partner with specific community groups that know their communities well, they know what would work, and that could complement some of the plans that our team and civil defence are looking into, especially with the REC workers that were stranded on top of their roofs. Some are displaced, and there's a lot of planning that needs to be done around that area. So I think it'd be good just to kind of grow the education and capability of for our community. Thank you.
Councillor Cowles.
Thank you, Mayor Kircher, for your report. I'd just like to agree around that, obviously coming from a community that's a little bit more remote, and last year we saw an event around flooding, and I think we identified some issues there at the time. I guess what my concern has been that we've spoken for quite some time about getting prepared. We've sort of identified that for our community hall that we could really do with an additional power source and a few things like that. And we've tried to sort of look at it at a local level, but in a small community and a rather transient holiday type community, getting that support behind it in the local area is pretty difficult. I think the other thing that's really important is, I know with the AF8, there's been workshops here in Oamaru and other places, but and there was one in Twizel, but I'd really like to see a follow-up one up the Waitaki end, or the upper Waitaki, up our end. We're very likely to have a number of small communities cut off up there. And I think also doing that, we may actually be able to get some traction and getting a group of people together to try and assist with some of that CDM type of stuff up there. There is a big challenge. The halls, many of them are sort of older and they are looked after by community groups, and where that funding comes from. But I think it's incredibly important that we put some resilience around that power supply, because they will become very much a centre of community. And I think that is a real concern. I know we've had a couple of power cuts up our end via other issues, and there's very little resilience in the way of additional power, as much as we have lots of it sitting on our back doorstep.
Extension cord to the nearest dam. I think obviously the thing to be aware of is, supplying a generator is one thing, but actually being able to plug it into a hall is another. It needs to be the right circuitry and so on has to be there in the hall. Otherwise you can only plug bits and pieces into it. So if you're wanting to run the heat pumps in a hall, you need to be able to have it plugged straight into the system, being a power source for the whole hall. So there's a bit of work to be done there. It's identifying which ones are priorities, and we'll talk a bit further with Alex and team around how we go about some of those things. Thank you. Anything else? Someone like to receive my report? Councillor Linwood and Councillor Halilele. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, item 6.1, recommendations of from the Power Committee from their meeting on the 6th of December. Seems a very long time ago. Okay. So we'll go through these one at a time. So first of all, it's a recommendation around adopting the risk management policy. Is someone happy to move that?
Yeah.
Councillor Halilele, seconded Councillor Linwood. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, some good work gone on in here, and really appreciate the effort that's gone in and the scrutiny that's been given. And it certainly is an important part of it is managing or identifying, managing the risks that we have. So with that, I'll put it, those in favour say aye. Aye. And against, that's carried. Next, we're looking at the insurance renewal, and in particular recommendation with some changes. Councillor Hopkins.
Look, I just had a couple of questions on the policy itself, if I may.
Is that the risk management?
Yes, correct. I'm wondering on page 28, and apologies if it wasn't picked up at the PAR meeting, or I didn't pick it up, but I noticed we're saying under scope and audience that this policy does not apply to external contractors and external consultants. And I rather wonder whether it perhaps should or could. So I pose that as a question. And also on page 37, there's a reference to key risk management. Key risks are owned by the executive leadership team. They can be strategic, financial, or operational. These risks require review by elected members. I think that should add, these risks require review and may be amended by elected members, because at the moment a review's just that. It's not, it doesn't overtly allow us to change a risk or anything that's proposed or identified by the ELT. And I think ultimately we should have that ability. So those are just a couple of things that
well, I think if it sees a review, I mean, that goes hand in hand with making recommendations for change. And so think that is implicit in that, but as far as the first item goes about not applying to contractors and so on, do we have any comments?
The only thing I'd say on that is we can't make contractors adopt our policy. I think it's for them to have their own policies, but I think in terms of who we contract with, ensuring that they've got adequate risk management arrangements in place is clearly part of our policy and approach to that. But I don't think we're in a position to impose our own policy on them, and our own policy might not be appropriate to them. They have to have their own risk management policy and approach.
Okay, right. So what were we on to? The insurance renewals. So a couple of changes there of changing excesses and removing some of the airport airside assets from the policy, reducing the premiums accordingly. So someone happy to move the recommendation we have? Councillor Thompson, thank you. Councillor Cowles seconded that. Thank you very much. Any comments? I shall put that. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against? Well, it's carried. Okay, on to so I'll check. Item 7.1, the council submissions to the Water Services Legislation Bill and the Water Services Economic Efficiency and Consumer Protection Bill. Who wants to speak to that? Mr. Hope does.
Yeah, thank you and good morning. Look, the council sought and got approval for an extension to submitting our submission to the today to allow council to consider it before it was actually sent to the select committee. We have had discussions of the submission previously. These are a couple of quite complicated pieces of legislation. We have not submitted on probably everything in the legislation that causes us concern, just submitted on the pieces that we felt were most relevant to this district in terms of water services going forward. I think, there are going to be a large number of submissions on this, and I think we can rely on the councils and other interested parties to probably raise, other matters as well. Certainly across Otago and Southland, the ones that we're most familiar with. Probably the other councils have taken slightly different approaches. So there, I think, as a whole, there is good coverage of all of the areas of concern. So really just happy to answer questions, but hoping for your endorsement so we can get this away today. Thank you.
Any comments first or questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Look, Paul, thank you for this. What if there's typos? Do we just tell you them now, or what? How do you? There's a couple of very small things on page 19.
If you could just pass them on at the morning tea break,
okay,
and we can,
I'll do that.
Yep, that'll be good. Okay. Any other questions?
Online.
Right.
I'll move the recommendation. I'm happy to move the recommendations in the future.
Councillor Hopkins, Deputy Mayor Halliday, thank you for seconding that. Any comments? Yeah, I shall put it. Those in favour, please be accepted. Please say aye.
Aye.
And those against, that's carried. And just thank you to Michael Goldingham and Andrea Goodlaw and the team for putting these together. Councillor Hopkins has a couple of minor amendments, but otherwise we can get them into the mail. Thank you. Right, on to standing orders. The adoption of the standing orders, so item 7.2. And fairly self-explanatory. So sorry, I'm just going to find, get myself in the right place. So page 80. in the recommendations, there's quite a lot of notes, which are just basically, yeah, we can note them without moving them. So overall, standing orders, they're there as a backstop. They help guide what we want, how we want meetings to run, and how chairs. It gives the chair some rules to guide meetings by, but yeah, normally the more relaxed atmosphere we can have, the better, and the less frequently we need to resort to standing orders, the better as well. Is there any questions on what's in front of us, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've got a question. If we vote on this today, which is what the recommendation says we will do, I'm wondering why it is that we are proposing that. Well, I wonder what 7 means. If we vote on it today, we as a council have adopted the standing orders. Then it says that the mayor will approve the final version once any amendments have been incorporated. Well, to me, that's superfluous and inappropriate. The standing orders are the council's. We vote on them today and they're adopted. So
so all that is that there's some choices in there, and so the idea is that those options get edited out that we don't want, and the options we do want are left in there. So it's just making sure that the wording reflects the decision that is made, and yeah, so it doesn't, because we're not seeing the final version of it today, so it does need to be amended.
So, well, sorry, question, why aren't we seeing the final version today? There's no reason why we can't.
Because we haven't decided on those. There's three options.
And we've decided on them. By way of informal conversation. Well, we can do that today.
So,
sorry?
Yeah, I think there's a good process here. It's absolutely fine. Yeah, it's not about anything being done that council hasn't agreed to, and making sure that there's equally that we've still, as governance team, got a response, a role to do, and ticking off the final version of it. Mr. Parley.
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify, particularly people listening online or watching online, that whilst we've discussed this informally through workshops and, to get an understanding of what the standing orders means, there's been no decisions made about the standing orders, and the purpose of this paper today is to make the decision on the standing orders. In terms of recommendation 7 there, if you were open to it, we could amend that to say that agrees that the Mayor for Waitaki will approve the final version with the reflecting what is agreed today by council and any other minor amendments to text, to actually clarify what the scope of that ability to agree the final version is.
Well, speaking to that, I would prefer that, because, and I don't mean this is not a sort of an argument about individuals or the mayor or anything of the sort. I want to make that absolutely clear. But standing orders are owned by the collective, not, and if we agree to things today, then in my view, that's the end of the matter. I'm a bit concerned on page 85 when I saw that if adoption of the proposed Waitaki District Council standing orders occurs, officers will update the proposed version with decisions, circulate proposed final version to all members of the governance team for a final review, and sign off via a convened review room. If there are no further changes, it's proposed that the mayor, I mean, that shouldn't happen. It should be done at a meeting, and can be done at a meeting. And I think your suggestion to amend 7 is a good one, and I support it.
There's nothing. There's no decisions being made other than, yes, we are happy that reflects what the decisions were. This is kind of chicken and egg thing. If they'd come with recommendations defining exactly what they we were to decide, I think there would be an even bigger uproar that, we haven't discussed this in a meeting. We haven't agreed that those are the options that we want. And so having the system, it's really getting down to semantics, I think, around, all we're doing is saying, yes, that's in accordance with what we've agreed at that meeting that we're having here today. If you need to.
Yeah, I do. The decisions, the choices that are required in here under 3, that is part of the formal process of adopting standing orders under the legislation. So you actually need to do that. And that's what 7 is about. So we cannot say under 3 what was supported at the workshop. We have to give the council the choice in the resolutions. This is why it's in there, and that you can choose yes or no, and then they have to be written against in the actual document saying this is the default or this is the one that's been agreed. So that is part of the formal adoption process that's under the legislation.
Sorry, I beg to differ. We can vote today on 3, 1, 2 and 3. We can vote that we want to provide audiovisual links for meetings, we want to have a casting vote for chairs, and we want to select option 3. We can do that today and should do it today in a public meeting.
That is exactly what we are doing. If you can let us get to that point, in fact, I'm going to go to that point because we're just going around in circles, and so that is what we're doing. The only other approval is saying that the final version, when it's written up, reflects that decision that we are making today. That it's not contradictory in any sort of way, or that there's any disagreement as far as that's not what we agreed. Right. So, Councillor Halliday.
Yes, no, thank you. I think I'm supportive of all these recommendations, and as you've said, it's up for us to choose today in terms of motion number 3, point 3, which option that we would be going with, and then also just inquiring whether motion number 6 needs an additional amendment if that is tight enough for us to include provisions for meetings by a audio visual link and some other additions.
Yes, that is the way that will be done. So once you decide on 3, 1, 2 and 3, then 6 will allow me to do that, and you're adopting that with those reflected into it. That's what 6 is about.
It's just to abbreviate this and to get to the point as much as possible, I'll move from the chair that council adopts so there's the wording from number 6. Council adopts in accordance with Schedule 7, Clause 27 of the Local Government Act 2002, with effect from 28 February 2023, the proposed Waitaki District Council Standing Orders 2022 to 25 as attached as Appendix 2, including provisions for meetings by audio-visual link, a casting vote for chairpersons, and the informal option as the default for making and speaking to motions for use over the remainder of the 2022 to 25 triennium. And then number 7 becomes number 2, and I mean, the wording is fine either way, whether it's this one or Mr. Palmer's version. So it's both meaning the same thing, but one being more explicit perhaps, but there's no intention not to do it any other way. So Deputy Mayor, seconding that?
Yes, second.
Okay. And noting Councillor Hopkins' enthusiasm to also second that. Okay. So all clear on what we're voting for? Any questions or comments? I shall put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, next one. Smoother one, I'm sure. Code of Conduct, item 7.3 on page 172. Get to that page. Okay, it's not the page I wanted to get to. I'll try that again. 172. Decided to go to 72. I'm sure I put the 172 in there. Mr. Parley, do you want to make any comments? You get to be, well, sort of the sheriff in this.
As long as I get a badge as well, I'll be happy. Each council is required to have a code of conduct that sets out behaviours and how any alleged transgression of those behaviours is dealt with. So each council must adopt a code of conduct, and until such time as it does, the code of conduct from the previous council carries over. LGNZ is working with councils, reviewed the template for that, and so the code of conduct that you have before you is largely based on the template that has been developed by the sector. And so the recommendation today is that you adopt, in accordance with the Local Government Act, with immediate effect, the proposed council code of conduct attached to Appendix 1.
Okay, do we have any questions? I've got one of councillors. Is anyone proposing any amendments to what's in front of us? Councillor Hopkins?
Well, yeah, look, I remain uneasy about what Local Government New Zealand has incorporated in the Code of Conduct with regard to Te Tiriti o Waitaki. I cannot see on the face of it how under headline 2 on page 185, I can't see how clause 1 equates with clause 3, and indeed I can't see how 1, 2 and 3 coexist. I remain concerned that 1 says, Tino Rangatiratanga, the principle of self-determination provides for Maori self-determination and manu motuhake. This requires local government, local authorities to be open to working with mana whenua partners in the design and delivery of their work programs. I have no issue with the second sentence, but the first sentence in a document that we will adopt formally, to my mind, opens the possibility of legal challenge. What if somebody says that self-determination means we have no ability to exercise authority or decision-making over matters that Maori deem to be those that they're entitled to determine by themselves? How does this relate to, say, adjudication of matters like wahi tupuna? I would just compare and contrast what this says with what the mayoral agreement on the Otago regional agreement on page 2 through 3, I think. I need to double check it, but there's a reference to how that the relationship between iwi and mana whenua and the mayoral forum in Otago, and it's more moderated and muted. And indeed, I think it's if you compare that with the Otago Local Authorities Agreement, I remain anxious about 1. And I think Local Government New Zealand has essentially entered into a partisan political position that doesn't reflect Parliament, but does reflect the view of the government. So it's taking a party position. And I don't see that, personally, I'd like to see that reconsidered somewhat. I also think we need to resolve, and whether we want to do it today, how breaches of the Code of Conduct are going to be addressed. We don't have to do that today. Apparently we can adopt the Code of Conduct without adopting the breach rules. But because I'm not sure we've actually thoroughly discussed them. But I do continue to be anxious about exposing ourselves to a potential legal challenge by embracing what's in 1, 2 and 3, and not acknowledging that they are arguably, 1 and 3 are arguably incompatible. You can't give some people self-determination and then assert equity in the principle of equity means equitable delivery. It's intellectually impossible.
Yeah, I think there is an aspect of hierarchy in this, but I just want to acknowledge, I mean, these are some challenging issues that are facing the country at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of concern and even anger happening around the country. And it is a time to try and, I guess, get a better understanding of the situation. And as I said to the government at the time, I think they had one of the jobs that they had to do with the Three Waters reform was explain to the communities across the country what co-governance actually meant, and something they've just failed to do. I think we need to face the facts that Ngāi Tahu, who the iwi in our area, they do have rangatiratanga. It's written into law in the Ngāi Tahu Act, and so there is a principle of self-determination that's in there. But equally, councils have legislation driving us, so we have to give effect to certain aspects of that self-determination, if you like. But equally, we've still got to make decisions. When you referred to a resource consent to planning issue, we've still got, we're the ones that've got the legal responsibility of making decisions under the RMA as it currently stands. So it's looking at those things, but it's making sure that if a part of our community has legally the rights to self-determination, that their considerations are absolutely taken into consideration. So it's challenging, and there's a bit of a potential minefield to negotiate as we try to find the answer on any particular thing. But it's undeniable that rangatiratanga exists for Ngāi Tahu. It's legislated. We have to be mindful of that. We have to work with that. And, I think one of the best things we can do is work as positively as we can with our respective runanga and make sure that actually we've got results that work for all of our community as much as possible. So that's, just a plea really, that we take a really considered view of this. Don't imagine the worst, actually think about how we can make it the best. And that would be my view. I've got Deputy Mayor Haley and then Mr. Palmer speak.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to acknowledge Councillor Hopkins' anxiety around the inclusion of this in the Code of Conduct. And I think when we think of te tiriti, it is legally effective in the New Zealand courts to the extent that it's recognised in the Acts of Parliament. And then we also need to consider what our role is within the Code of Conduct, and it is around stewardship. It's around our role to help empower, to help enhance, and to work alongside our mana whenua here to help protect our resources and to protect and look after our community. We also assume that democracy has a level playing field. Māori never had a level playing field to begin with. So I think those are some of the factors that I just wanted to be quite explicit about today, and just seeking just some kind of understanding and just for you to consider those factors. The Code of Conduct attached, the specific purpose is to enhance the effectiveness of our authority and the provision of good government. For our community, we want to promote effective decision-making and community engagement, and that does require us to partner with Māori. And we also want to enhance the credibility and accountability of our authority, and we don't want to be having to argue against things which could actually complement the actual community outcomes that we want to achieve. And we also want to develop a culture of mutual trust, both with our community and with mana whenua. And we can do that using the guidelines of tikanga and using the guidelines that we can actually use te tiriti as a founding document to help us guide some of those principles. So I'm more than happy for it as it stands here. I have no anxiety about what is stated here, and I'm fully supportive.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, a couple of things really in terms of it's being, leaving us exposed to legal challenge. I'd say this is a code of conduct that is about, how councillors and other elected members, behave, and systems for dealing with that. And it's not in the sense binding what's being put in here, it's to acknowledge what already exists and what is actually enshrined in law. So, the treaty exists with the, between the Crown and Maori, and there are already legal binding clauses within the Local Government Act, within the Resource Management Act, and within other acts that bind local government to acknowledge and to uphold that. And I think in terms of including it within the Code of Conduct, I don't think it actually exposes us to any more legal challenge than previously existed by the law that has been agreed by Parliament. But outside of that, I think it's something that's important to be considered in here, in that clearly it's a big issue for the country and for communities in terms of how the treaty and associated acts of Parliament that reflect the treaty are upheld, and their impacts on communities. And I think we should consider whether it's beholden on this organisation and you as a governance team, in terms of your community leadership responsibilities, to reflect that and work with the community in terms of how we work through what are difficult and challenging issues for the country and for our local communities, which if we get it right should produce benefits for all the community if we get it right. So I think the issue about exposing us to legal challenge isn't there, but there's clearly a role for us as a council and you as a governing body to work through what are challenging issues within what's reflected in the law.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hopkins?
Well, look, I just wonder, when the matter is put, I'll speak to it. But at the moment, the other issue for me is what are we going to do about breaches of the code? Now, I don't think we've discussed that matter adequately enough, and I would like to see us. The report tells us we can adopt the code without necessarily dealing with the breaches of it today. And if nothing else, I believe that should be discussed a little bit further, because it hasn't really been discussed in any length in a workshop or any. And I noticed the Deputy Mayor nodding, and I'm comforted by that, because I do think we need to talk it through and be clear whether we want a one-step or a two-step process. Who Alex has identified as independent assessors or evaluators, when there are things there that I just think need to be canvassed a bit further. So if we can do the code of conduct without adopting the process for dealing with breaches today, I'd be grateful.
Any comments?
So, I mean, I think, we haven't managed to discuss that at length through pressure of time and other things that we've had to deal with. I think you could adopt and decide whether you want to adopt a single step or a two-step process today, if you wanted to, or you could ask that we make some further time in the workshops to discuss that and the implications of the various options before we bring it back to council at a future date. In terms of the potential investigators, there has historically been work done between the Otago councils to maintain a list of approved investigators. It's quite a lengthy list, and I think it's subject to amendments in that a couple have said that they're no longer available. But of course, when that is updated, I will share that with you. I think it's been previously shared. We've already got it.
I mean, it talks about initial assessors and then the independent investigators and so on. And I think there's some, we've got some good people locally that, a couple of past councillors, for example, that could be the initial assessors and take us through that part of the process to then determine whether, what the next step is, whether it's mediation or some training or goes to an independent investigator. So, I'm reasonably relaxed about that process. That it is thorough. It's always a bit of a concern that about who can lay a complaint, that it's only members or the CE, so members of council or the CE, which means that the community relies on one of us to put a complaint in on their behalf, or the CE to put a complaint in on behalf of staff, for example. So that's something that we need to be aware of, I think, and understand that it doesn't cut the community out, but it needs to be that process. So yeah, any other questions?
Well, sorry, look, just to clarify, in that case, do I understand, or is the chief executive suggesting that recommendation 3 could read adopts a two-step process for determining, or do you want one of us to move accordingly, a single step or a two-step process?
Well, I think if there's confidence about what that means and so on, I think, we can make that decision today. And then all that needs to happen is, we need to get an understanding of who the independent investigators, trying to get the right wording, who they would be in due course.
So I was just saying, in terms of the independent investigators, you have been supplied with the list, but it is being updated again. There's another couple of dropped out, I understand, so we will update that.
Sorry, that's what I mean. It's the final list. Councillor Blackley. Sorry, I thought you were waving.
I would just like to, if anyone else didn't have any comments, just do we move decision 1 and then is that what we're seeking to do here?
So we've got the recommendations on page 172. So adopting in accordance with schedule, blah, 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 with immediate effect, the proposed council code of conduct is attached. Number 2 is the draft policy on dealing with the alleged breaches. And number 3 is the process, adopts the process for determining and investigating complaints. So that's the 1-step or 2-step process.
Yeah, that's what I would be in favour of, the 2-step.
Okay. Do you want to move 1, 2, and with number 3 adopts the 2-step process for determining?
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
A seconder, Councillor Thompson. Okay. Any comments?
Well, look, sorry, I'm going to speak to the matter. I take account, I'm not going to vote against adopting the code of conduct because I want to indicate, A, that I'm not anxious or obsessed. I still believe that with the notion of self-determination ill-defined or undefined, and whether it relates to Ngāi Tapu or to Maori, and in fact, the code of conduct we're adopting says the latter, not the former. The other issue with regard to self-determination is, does it relate to a particular set of taonga and in particular areas, or is it universal? And I'll just briefly quote a significant individual who talked about democratic government. This is a quote: "Democratic government can accommodate Maori political aspiration in many ways. It can allocate resources, it can delegate authority. What it cannot do is acknowledge the existence of a separate sovereignty. As soon as it does that, it isn't a democracy. We can have a democratic form of government, or we can have Indigenous sovereignty. They can't coexist, and we can't have them both." And that was said in 2000 by David Longy. So it's not some mad right-wing fanatic. It's an intelligent, coherent leader of the Labour Party and former Prime Minister of this country. And it's a debate we need to have honestly and openly, and we haven't had it because the government hasn't engaged in it, as you have pointed out. That said, I also signalled, in a spirit of goodwill, I'm not going to vote against adopting the code.
A week's a long time in politics, let alone 23 years. Yeah, and I mean, part of it may be a change in attitudes, and I don't necessarily agree that democracy can't exist in the form that's being proposed, but yeah, we do need to have that debate. It would be good for the country to have that debate. It might be a bit of a difficult one to have at times, but it's something that you know, there's this, I guess, this creeping change by almost by stealth. It needs to be better discussed and better understood, and you know, hopefully there will be an opportunity for that. As far as, you know, whether we're talking about Ngāi Tahu or Māori generally, this is written for Māori generally, but equally it's with the recognition that only Ngāi Tahu have rangatiratanga in their takiwā throughout the South Island. So yeah, it becomes more defined when you get into those other aspects like that. So anyway, any other comments?
Sorry, there is one very quick comment, and I don't want to resolve it today, but by adopting a two-step process, there's one matter that we haven't formally determined either, which is that whether independent investigators can have binding or non-binding recommendations. I think personally I would prefer the latter because it's more in keeping with this two-step process, but maybe Alex can come back to us on that, along with a list of investigators he's got.
You happy with that, Mr. Palmer?
Yeah, I can come back to you on that. I mean, ultimately, it's for the council to decide whether it gives that, you know, cedes that out to the investigator to, you know, agree binding recommendations.
Okay. Right, with that, I shall put it. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much, and thanks for the spirit of the discussion. Right, on to 7.4, ratifying the Otago Local Authorities Triennial Agreements. And page 218, 16. Sorry. Okay, do you want to speak to that, Mr. Kelly?
I can do an intro whilst people are finding the page. It's a bit of a scroll down, isn't it, to find that? So just an overview of why we need to do this. So the Local Government Act 2002 requires the council to enter into an agreement with all local authorities within the region which it falls, and we've obviously got two regions within which we fall, no later than the 1st of March after each triennial general election. So we're there, just about. And this should set out the protocols for communication and coordination amongst the councils during the triennium. So that's the requirement we need. On a practical basis, each of the mayoral fora and the associated meetings they have act as a body really to share resources, to coordinate efforts over things that we, common challenges and issues and opportunities that we face. Practically within the Targa Mayoral Forum, this has included things like cooperation on joint working around Three Waters reform, where we have some shared resources at the moment, which adds to our strength, but also produces a saving for us and not having to do it all ourselves. Planning for our waste and the associated infrastructure, which we're looking at jointly, and also around economic development. So it does produce practical benefits for each of the councils by having those good working relationships. And I'd suggest that it's something that we want to build on further going forward as we face challenges and constraints in our resources. So the recommendation is that we ratify the attached final Otago Local Authorities Triennial Agreement and authorise the Mayor to sign that agreement on behalf of the Council.
Just add to that, so I mean, in general principle, there's the individual mayors can't bind their councils at the mayoral forum, so it's not about that. But it does utilise each mayor's legal position as leaders of the community to come together and make decisions on positions and so forth that work. So sometimes and in the example of Canterbury, you know, we couldn't agree on enough common areas on Three Water reform to actually make a submission to the water entity bills and so on. So, you know, so we didn't. But usually we find where the common ground is, and we try and represent our councils or our districts in that way. And yeah, just that working together and giving a stronger voice is a really important aspect of what the Mayoral Forum, both the Target and Canterbury, can provide. And is there any questions?
Yeah, so sorry, just I do have a question. I'm happy, by the way, to move the recommendations if you'll allow me to, but I do have one very simple question for us. How long have we had this document? We have to adopt it by March 1, i.e. tomorrow. How long have we had it?
Not long.
2 weeks, I think it was signed off at the last,
Yeah.
the Target Mayoral Forum. So I think
So yeah, it's that whole thing of trying to get everything through all the processes. So obviously the Mayoral Forum had to agree to it. Excuse me. So that's delayed it getting to here.
Well, I will move recommendations 1 and 2 if I may.
You may. Do we have a second for that? Deputy Mayor Halliday, thank you. And comments on that, Councillor Hopkins?
See, look, just speaking to it, if we had it for 2 weeks, it would have been helpful given the amount of reading we had to do over the weekend for things like this to have been circulated earlier, I think. And I would just draw members' attention to the partnership provisions in clauses 35, 36 and 37 on page 223, which I think I referred to before and which I think are generous, logical, sincere and truly represent partnership as it should be implemented and exercised.
Thank you.
I just had a question in the context of this group and and depending on the way the political cards fall over the next 12 months, is the section on collaboration going to need to carry some kind of recognition of what may be required there around the water reform? It talks about it loosely already, about shared services and facilities and such like, but
yeah, this is, I guess, an enabling document and sets out how we do things, and what we do then falls into that. So if there's a change of government later this year and there's a different way that we need to look at Three Waters, then I think that's falls into that as to how we collaborate. So yeah, I think it fits within it at the moment. So yeah, because that is definitely a major issue that's facing us as to whether there's how significant a change is there going to be in October. Any other questions or comments? We'll put it, those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, those carried, and is the only council in the South Island who gets to do this twice. We will now move to the ratifying the Canterbury Local Authorities Triennial Agreement. Do you want to move that? Deputy Mayor Halliday and seconded Councillor Linwood, thank you. Any comments?
Sorry, it's a question again. Don't mean to be horrid, but again, we have to ratify it by tomorrow. How long have we had this document?
I'm not sure on that one. We didn't do it last meeting, did we? It was the one before. Can't recall.
I don't recall. So if you want an accurate answer, I'll write you a letter.
No, okay.
Sort of a Lagoima. Okay. Right, we got it moved, seconded, no comments, so we'll put it, those in favour, say aye. And against, that's carried. Right, onto the real stuff, naming of a road. This is Roger's moment, so Mr. Cook, would you like to make any comments on this one?
Thank you, Mick Kitcher. As you say, the main business of the morning, the confirmation of the road name for the second stage of the subdivision on 21 Prohibition Road, Amarama. The representative for the developer has put through 3 names. The recommended name is Highland Way, because that meets all the policy requirements. Free to take questions, or let's proceed.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? So would you like to delve into this one, Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder if the location of this particular subdivision, covering the boundaries of both the staunch Southern Man area and the Red and Black Brigade of Canterbury, that perhaps the addition of ERS on the end would be far more appropriate, and that we could call it the Highlanders Way.
I think that would be really good. Yeah, it's good to note that connection, I suppose, with the Otago side of things, particularly when Christchurch City Council is handing all the members of the Canterbury Mayoral Forum for to support their new stadium, which is going to be the home to the Crusaders. So I've told them there's no way that our people will want to do that. But yeah, we can perhaps we'll see how long, if we put the sign up with Highland Way on it, we'll see how long it takes before someone's written the ERS on it, and we'll check whether it's your handwriting. Mr. Cook.
Just responding to that, it's not common practice to name a road after somebody who's still alive, and therefore I don't believe the Highlanders are dead yet.
Verdicts on the season to come. They're not dead yet.
Yes, there's definitely a response to that, but it wouldn't be loyal to Otago to say. Councillor Linwood, Councillor Hopkins.
Sorry, just a question. I'm assuming that the Highland Way, and that could relate to airports and mountains, as well as at the moment currently relatively unsuccessful rugby teams. But I'm assuming that to Vest and WDC as road, that's the bit, is it? It's a piece off the Omarama Road and Matata State Highway 83. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. We haven't got to move her. Yeah. Councillor Linwood, you'd like to move that, and Deputy Mayor Haley, thank you. Seconded. Right. I think we've probably discussed it enough, to be fair. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against. It's carries. Right. So the next item is Waitaki District Health Services, and they're not scheduled to be here until what time?
We have got 3 things, fortunately.
Well, that's the excluded stuff though.
Yeah. Mr. Hope, do you know what time they were coming to present this particular annual report?
Oh, I thought it was 11. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, it's just not how it's written on the run sheet, so that's fine. Look, we're going to have to adjourn the meeting for the time being, and we'll see whether we can get Mr. Marshall and possibly Mrs. Elgar along to speak to this public item. There is a part in public excluded which was going to carry on from that, but in the moment we'll adjourn, and can't say when we'll be back. Could be up to 50 minutes from now. but if we can get them earlier, then we will. So thanks very much for those who have joined us on the live stream. And yeah, sorry for this bit of a break, but we've been too efficient. Obviously, the discussion on Highland Way was far quicker than what we thought it might have been, as much as we did try to draw that one out. So anyway, thank you very much, and we'll close off for now and reconvene as soon as possible. Excuse me, everyone. I just
members click the 2 minute option.
Yeah.
So we need to notify them.
I'll just point out just how effective our CE has been. They
need to come in for that whole lot.
Keith and Helen will be here in 10 minutes.
Well, I think it's about notifying them.
To bring Tim, you noticed you just kept talking right through my spiel. It's all right. You don't know what's happening. No, it's no. Right, welcome back, everyone. We'll reconvene this meeting, so apologies for the bit of a delay. Just that we're running ahead, but we're very thankfully have got the chair and deputy chair of the Waitaki District Health Services Board and the CEO here as well to report on the 2021-22 annual report. So without any further ado, I'm just happy to hand over to the three of you to take it from here as you decide who's going to push the button. That's it. So welcome.
Look, thank you for the opportunity to talk to the annual report. It's good to have it here on the table. We were, I think, 8 days behind the statutory deadline for getting that signed out by audit, but those were for factors beyond our control, and I won't relitigate the whole sorry saga of the fact that we're now included with Observatory Village, but I managed to do that anyway. But that was actually the reason for the delay in getting that audit sign out.
I think the fact that audit are 5 months behind on auditing ours because they haven't got people to do it.
So 8 days is not a problem.
8 days is really good. So
But we did miss, as a result of that, we had missed the statutory deadline. So that will be noted in our internal management reports, and we flagged that on our website in terms of the annual report. But those were for factors that are completely and utterly beyond our legal control to do anything whatsoever about due to the inclusion of Observatory Village Group. So we've been through all that. It is what it is. I don't think it takes any talking to. It's not the world's best result. It's in line with what we had been briefing council around in terms of the course of the year. One of the things that we are looking forward to when we see the final audit reports back is what we'll see from the management reports relating to the audit is a much improved control environment and financial management environment. And I think the previous year we had something like 40 or 50 unclosed audit items remaining, and I think this year we're down to about 2 or 3. So quite a substantial improvement all around, but the financial performance and the underlying issues still remain as reported in that annual report. So I'll shut up at that point and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. And just note also, as is described in the start of the report, it was quite a year of upheaval with changing directors and CEs and so forth along the way. So not an easy year for any organisation to go through that, but yeah, we know you've all been working very hard to make sure that things are as good as possible, and basically to try and turn a fairly large ship around. So thank you for the work that you have done. Councillors, do you have any questions on the report? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, look, I do have a number. I suppose I'm trying to if I look at page 254, or sorry, that your report pages aren't numbered, so it's 254 of our agenda. We've got total the Southern District Health Board revenues up from 10.9 to 11.3. Other revenue seems to have jumped a lot from 2.7 to 3.3, and personnel costs would appear to contribute the majority of the loss. I suppose the other question, if I'm reading this as a layperson, we're showing a loss on that page, and yet if you look at page 302, we're identifying a surplus. So can you work through some of those numbers for us, please?
Sure. The surplus issue is simply down to the inclusion of the Observatory Village Group. So if I can mark that. In terms of the other revenues, as you'll remember back to our briefing earlier in December, I think it was, there was quite a number of issues about how things had been reported in the past in previous reports. So there will be a number of adjustment factors that have drifted their way through there. But what you're looking at is the group report rather than the individual hospital results. So, and I'm not in a position to comment about Observatory Village or component parts.
My other questions, Mayor Fletcher. On page 256. You show borrowings having gone up from 9.2 to 5.5. But that'll be both the village and the hospital, won't it? Because as far as I can make out, there's references later on to our having lent you 2,000, but basically 2.5 million, but that's not the same as 9 and 5. So again, are we blending the two? Okay, that's fine.
The difficulty of the blended reports is that we just simply can't pick out the hospital results from there. What you had advanced us the hospital in the course of last year was completely repaid when we repatriated the observatory village loan funds.
Councillor, also note that on the annual report, there is a page number and it's in the centre of the bottom of
Sorry, quite right. Other questions? On page 280 of the agenda, we've got reference to a lease for 13 vehicles. I'm just curious, are they parts of individual contracts? And if I may, and apologies, but it's a public document. So there's a reference on page 281, services to you of $56,000. Can you tell us what that's for, please?
Certainly. So the operating leases there over the vehicles, in prior years, they had been treated as capital leases, as operating leases. And actually, when we looked at them as part of our financial review last year, we determined that they were in fact a split between operating and capital leases, and hence the treatment of them is different, and they've been highlighted this year round. The services from myself in the period of time was I was employed initially by the board as a contractor to cover the gap after Phil Jamison had left the CE role and after Kelvin Kite had left the acting CE role. And so I filled that for a period of time. I think it was for about 3 months until I took the employment contract.
So at that time, you were a contractor rather than an employee.
Thank you. Look, two final questions very quickly. 285, there's a reference to potential litigation and Health and Disability Commission complaints, and I'm wondering if they are sorted. And the last one from me, you talk about COVID admissions on page 305 being a continuing problem. What's the level of admissions you're getting on to this day?
In respect to the litigations, audit require us to disclose any potential litigations, and so those can extend to either personal or employment matters, or they can attend to other items. This one in particular was a potential for litigation, and so therefore it has to be flagged as a potential liability, and it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about the nature of that in a public forum. And the second question, sorry, I'm getting older these days.
You talked about COVID being a continuing and ongoing issue, and you having admissions, and I'm just curious to know what the level of admissions currently is.
Right throughout the period from the onset or the arrival of widespread COVID in New Zealand, we went through a bell curve type slope where we had an increasing number of admissions. They sort of fell into a regular pattern. Once the first wave had passed, that pattern of admissions for us, while it decreased, it didn't go away. And that's pretty much the situation we still find ourselves in. People who generally the latest versions of variants of COVID aren't as dangerous as previous ones, but they can still be quite dangerous to individuals who have other underlying conditions. And so therefore the level of admissions that sit around with COVID is still sort of staying at a relatively steady level, but it is nowhere near at the same levels as it was during the peaks. And I guess that we haven't had a COVID admission because of COVID for quite some time. What we tend to get is admissions of people who have other things and COVID, and that's currently what we're seeing. So there's a base incidence of COVID out there which is showing up in presentations and continues to show up in presentations at the hospital.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Some good questions there. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. So just get back to the report itself. So we've got a couple of recommendations. One that we received the annual report, and that we the usual one around signing the resolution pursuant to section 122 of the Companies Act in lieu of the AGM. You have to move those. Councillor Hopkins and Deputy Mayor Halilele, thank you very much. Any further comments? I'll just say some more words basically in support of all the work that has gone on both during the year that's being reported on and since then, and just thank you, Keith, for the leadership you have shown and the skills that you've brought, which are quite particular and yeah, very, very helpful in this particular circumstance. And to Helen and the board, thank you for all the extra hours that I know you're all putting in to make sure that this works. And yeah, I just acknowledge the range of skills around the board table, from community representation and you know, through to the clinical skills that are there, and the you know, the links to mana whenua and so on. So yeah, I think you know, very pleased to have them there, and yeah, just appreciate all the work that you have done. So with that, it's been moved and seconded. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against, that's carried. Thank you very much. That finishes the public part. Would someone like to move? We're going to public excluded. Councillor Thompson, thank you. Councillor Holding, second to that. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against, that's carried. So thank you very much to all those who have joined us. Thank you for watching this live stream, and we're just going to be having a separate discussion in public excluded now, and so I'll adjourn the meeting for the time being. Thank you.